this side of the room to just sort of fill in over here, that would be awesome. We're a little short on the amount of RSVPs we got. This is our first one of these, so we appreciate you guys for coming out. And
this is the dating game, right? I'm at the right place.
Absolutely, because I got this in. But I don't want to be.
This is the dating.
Was it Chuck Woolery? Was that the? Who was the first one?
No,
that's your day.
Oh, way back.
Okay,
I don't remember.
All right,
not that old.
Welcome to it's our group we created. Sports analytics nerds, we're people too, right? And you guys are familiar with sports analytics? You guys look like you came in prepared. Fantasy football, fantasy sports, stuff like that. Is that your familiarity with analytics? Sure. Sure? All right, perfect. Angel, and where is on the phone? He's coming back in. That's okay. This is the best part. He's gonna miss this part. So, our company is called EPLAY, right? And what EPLAY is, we are basketball's first unified system for verified statistics, analytics, global ratings, and digital content. We feel like we belong to everybody though, and we're going to tell you why here in just a moment. So welcome to EPLAY, that's who we are. This is part of our leadership team. Charles Gaines, co-founder and chief marketing officer, but also a bunch of other things. Ryan Gerardo, he is also the co-founder and CEO. And Dan Dickey is our chief quantitative. Yeah, there you go. Big words. Chief quantitative is numbers. He does numbers and puts these things together for us. We'll talk to them in just a minute. So the idea behind this, or sort of I guess you could say, our objective here, is we want to kind of create a community. We want to create an interest in statistical data analysis, more commonly referred to as analytics. We want to create a platform that generates interest in statistical analysis, and it allows us to access talented individuals like you guys as well, who could help us in our mission of revolutionizing statistical analysis and big data modeling. And we're doing that starting here tonight by conducting a series of these workshops. We hope, or we actually believe, that we can not only kind of educate folks who come and hear what we have to say, but certainly we can provide an outlet for you guys, or whoever might be talented and interested, to participate in this stuff with us as well. Now, so what are analytics, right? The literal definition of analytics is the discovery, interpretation, and communication of meaningful patterns in data. For us in sports analytics, it's, to put it simply, it's how you marry numbers and other information to make decisions, right? Free agency, NBA free agency just happened, right? It's still going, but the big, the first day they spent, what, $3 billion in contracts? That's part of what we, want to talk about, is how those things sort of come together, and then how you build rosters based upon analytics, right? So why basketball for us right now? Because obviously this is, in America, the biggest, sport is American football, right? It's that time of year, it's becoming the fall. But American football really doesn't have the same reach globally as the game of basketball. Basketball is the third most popular sport in all the world. In all the world. That's 2.2 billion people involved with basketball in some way, shape, or form around the world. There's a little less than 8 billion people in the entire world, so you're talking about more than a quarter of the planet is somehow affiliated with basketball. Be it a fan, be it a player, be it just somebody who, has a basketball goal in their backyard, right? So 2.2 billion people around the world are involved with basketball. Here in this country, 16 million youth, organized youth basketball players in the US alone that don't have reliable data. And that's what we're going to get to as well. What is data, right? For us, it's numbers, it's stats. So parents, coaches, scouts, recruiters, and media, they increase the market to over 40 million stakeholders for basketball in just America, right? So you gotta start here. We're gonna start here and then move on and make it a global thing, right? That's what we want to become as well. So you take a top-down approach. Basketball, again, third most popular sport in the entire world, resting comfortably behind soccer and cricket, right? Cricket's number 2. Anybody cricket fans? I have no idea how it's played. I don't know any of the rules. I know it's called a cricket bat, though. And I don't think they call them pitchers. You know what they call them? Bowlers, right? Is that correct? Okay. We talked about American football. American football's 8th in the world, and baseball's 8th, football's 9th, right? There you go. So that's why basketball is where we start. Football, baseball, they're less popular than things like field hockey and ping pong, which, by the way, you owe me. Play ping pong back here. Welcome to the Capital Factory, by the way. It's a really cool spot, right? Okay. Thank you all for coming again. So if you guys are familiar with Moneyball, you've heard of Moneyball, talking about sports analytics, how about the term going viral, right? Moneyball was a movie that sort of brought analytics made it go viral for common folk, people that never really thought about it or heard about it or understood what it meant, right? So Major League Baseball was kind of the first one to bring this to the forefront. How'd they do that? They made a movie and put Brad Pitt in it. And when you put Brad Pitt in things, you know, people watch. Now you can say Moneyball, and people know what you're talking about. They may not know what did you, oh, was that you? I thought I heard something else on the microphone. Okay. So by putting Brad Pitt in a movie, you have an opportunity to sort of grow your brand, so to speak, right? Anybody familiar with the story behind Moneyball, right? Without going into the movie or the details and how that team was built, right? No, anybody? So essentially, what the Oakland Athletics did was they figured out a way to be a small market team, implement a budget, and figure out what wins games for them. In baseball, especially right now, the argument kind of still goes on as to what is the most important stat. People talk about WAR, wins above replacement. They talk about batting average. And you have this argument now between people that's batting average or on base percentage. Well, the Oakland Athletics built a roster with high on base percentage. They didn't care what your batting average was. They wanted you to get on base. Basketball, we'll get to that in a moment, is very, very similar in how that works or why teams are built that way. So by having high on base percentages, in basketball, we call it getting extra possessions. In baseball, it's called getting extra at-bats, more opportunities to score, scoring chances, if you will. So Oakland is a small market team, even though they're in a really largely populated area. They don't have a big fan base, right? So that's a lot of times where economics comes into sports. Oakland, though, has been they've been doing this, Moneyball is not new to them, and it's still going on. So for almost 20 years, they've made the playoffs in half of those. They haven't won a championship, right? I mean, that's all but one team every year wins a championship. They haven't won a championship, but if this trajectory continues this year, they'll have gone to the playoffs in 10 out of the last 19 seasons. That's really good odds. That's a really good way of building a team. So that's over 50% success rate in terms of getting to where you want to go, and that's to the tournament, as Bill Parcells would call it, right? So how do we get there? First of all, baseball allowed analytics to go viral, right? It made everybody who in and around sports sort of understand what that word meant. Then you get into the critics aspect, and that's something else these guys will help us talk about. Now, so since the implementation or the going viral of analytics in baseball, statistical analysis has really kind of been adopted across the entire sports landscape. None bigger, really, than the NBA, than in basketball. There's a lot of other factors as to why that works, and that's something we can talk about another time in terms of like the nuts and bolts of it. Basketball, the biggest stat, or the biggest change that you'll have seen really over the last 7 years, going back to 2012, is the increase in three-point shooting. Volume shooting is now what NBA teams want to do, right? You see it all the time. So in 2012, I think it was like 18 attempts roughly a game per team in the NBA, about 18.4 three-point attempts per game. That number in the last 7 years has jumped by a little over 50%. Right, so now the average team in the NBA is shooting close to 30 three-pointers a game, right? So it's math. 35% is about the average in terms of what the success rate is on a three-point shot in the NBA. So they thought, man, that's like 1 out of every 3 attempts, right? So if I shoot more of those than I do other higher percentage shots, the math tells me that if I'm successful in 35% of those, as long as I shoot more than the other team, I'm going to win games. The highest three-point shooting team in the league a year ago was who? Anybody? It's a simple one. Golden State. Golden State. Two of the top 5 teams in shooting last year in the three-pointers met each other in the NBA Finals. Toronto Raptors were number 5 this last year in terms of shooting the three. So that is the biggest, most glaring stat in terms of how the game has changed in the NBA in applying analytics. Dan will talk about that here in just a little bit as well. All right, oh my goodness, I went too far. So again, thank you guys for being here. That's just a quick introduction as to why it's a basketball company, why we're on the basketball right now, and a little bit about us and where we want to go from here. Again, we thank you guys for coming out tonight. We hope to see all you guys as we continue to do these, hopefully once a month or so or something like that. So again, let me introduce you guys. This is part of our leadership team. This is Charles Gaines, the Chief Marketing Officer and co-founder, Ryan Gerardo, our CEO and co-founder, and Dan Dickey, Chief Quantitative Analyst. Right? Did I say it right? Quantitative?
Yeah.
It's really, it's like potato. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We'll get a hangman board up here and figure out how to spell it. So what I like to do is take it to my panel now, and I want to talk to Ryan first. Let's talk about the beginnings of this company. Let's talk about your beginnings in terms of why basketball? Why did you choose basketball as an avenue for you to start this company?
Basketball chose me, right?
The basketball chose you?
No, honestly, it's kind of a crazy story. I started basketball league in my driveway when I was about 13 years old. Ended up taking that across the state of Texas. Was fortunate enough to exit that and go work for a company that ran basically beer leagues up in Chicago. So at that time I was running, it's a sport and social is the concept. And basically we were running these leagues all over the country at that time, and I would have somebody show up and give me $100 and say, hey, I'm an intermediate player. Then I have another guy show up and say, hey, I'm a beginner. And then they would get out there, and all of a sudden this beginner looks like he's Michael Jordan, and this intermediate looks like he's never seen a basketball before. And so 2 guys are all pissed off at me because they just gave me $100 each, and I didn't deliver the experience they wanted. So the thought was we could create this skill assessing algorithm that kind of helped to match these players together a little bit better. And potentially, as long as we got their stats, we could end up ranking them nationally, improving their experiences, putting cash prizes on the line. Let's fast forward about 3 or 4 years now, and that's not what it's about at all. When I first got started, I really wanted to have a career in basketball, and I didn't think that would involve me being around, the most elite athletes, and thankfully that's exactly where we got drugged straight into. And so now the mission's a lot bigger than that. I never expected that the space would be as wide open as it is. For a guy that's working on an analytical project, a lot of times it's hard to believe that people haven't done some of the things that we're doing in the space that we're in, but they haven't. And it's a truly unique opportunity, and so we're really excited to be creating this global ranking system, really built for the first time on a valid set of data coming from the most amateur levels all the way up to the highest levels.
And part of how we do that, and I'll tell you that in a minute, part of what we do is we just call it data acquisition. Well, how do you acquire data in this field, right? We can always go, we can look at, NBA statistics and, collegiate statistics and things like that, but where do you go to find the grassroots kids, the kids that are coming up, the 12, 13, 14, 15, on into high school? Talk about that and how we got involved there in creating the scorekeeping app, which allows us not only to be, take over the scores table, but allows us to acquire that data.
Yeah, of course. So when I say the space is even wider open than we expected, some of you guys that are familiar with sports, probably familiar with high school sports at least, probably familiar with something called max preps. It's laughable, but that is the authority on that's the authority on data at that level, at the amateur levels. Guys, that stuff's being reported by parents. Do you know what parents have? A vested interest. They need to get a scholarship. That data is utter crap. Sorry, Max Preps. It's the truth, though. So, the space was totally wide open for us to go straight to the source and take over the scores table right think about it. There has been an official document sitting at those scorers tables since basketball time began. And you know what's been happening to that? People have been wadding it up and throwing the piece of paper in the trash. That's good data. That came from somebody, it should be good data, it came from somebody that's considered to be an extension of the officiating crew, the official scorer. Now, obviously with our scorekeeping platform, it goes a lot more in depth than just keeping points and fouls like a traditional paper book does. And so we have to train our people up to a significantly higher standard, but nonetheless, that person whose job it should be to keep that data accurately, they're already there. It's just our job to train them up to a certain standard and equip them with a tool to start collecting what we consider to be valid data, feeding that to the system, and then distributing it out to the stakeholders of all different types.
Ryan Gerardo. It's good stuff. Big Brain. Check out the Big Brain on Brett. Good movie, by the way. Another Tarantino film. You've seen the new one? No? Doesn't matter. Charles Gaines here is our Chief Marketing Officer, and he's one of the co-founders as well. This guy is like our Swiss Army knife. So many different things he pulls off. He's an amazing, amazing guy. So I wanted to talk to you in terms of, you've been marketing for how long? 1 million years. Which is a long time. I can see it. 25 years. It's a long time, right? It's like, you know, you can drink legally plus 4 years, right? That's the amount of experience that you have. So, just real quick, your marketing background is not basketball, right? It's not all basketball. It's a bunch of different things. So how do you, as a marketer, when you come in and you see this stuff and you try to take this task of figuring out a way to make this part of the general public, how do you do that?
It's like anything. I mean, you want to get in the stream of what people are involved in. I mean, I'm not naive. I mean, the basketball culture in the world of grassroots basketball especially is a behemoth. And it's been marching downhill for decades. And so to get involved in that's been very, very interesting. But the challenge from my perspective is to take analytics, numbers, out of kind of the back room calculators and into the mainstream. How do I help a parent understand how these numbers can help my son or daughter get better or get to a scholarship? How can I help a team executive to get the most? I mean, the whole part of Moneyball was the realization that the perception that we can't compete with X.
Right.
So fill in the blank with X, whether it's we can't go to a school that can afford all these things and therefore that child has a better chance. We can't compete with a giant organization like the Yankees that can just buy whatever they need to buy. So you have to come up with something more creative, and so you figure out other ways to work with the system. But from my perspective is to help, there's a humongous need for education. This initiative here is the very baby steps of coming to the community, somewhat with our hands open to say, talk to us, help people like ourselves who have a dream, who worked very hard for the last couple of years to create a product. I felt the need to say this wasn't intended to be an infomercial for our company. You know, we're here as a community to talk about stats, to talk about sports, what we love, what we're passionate about.
90 minutes to do.
I got you. So it's really finding out, my basic platform and my foundation for good marketing is to understand what it is that people want and figure out creative ways to get it to them. So I'm real passionate about user interface, user experience, building brands and building community. So that's what got me excited about this. I'm a sports fan, I'm a sports nut. Obviously I'm built for basketball, so I'm perfect for the job. Actually more enjoy football, but this has been a great learning experience for me and having these type of guys to learn from. So it's been phenomenal. So it's been the challenge of designing products that are intuitive to use. And just to brag on that a little bit, you talked about the statistics, the need to collect those stats. We built our own app. We spent about a year building an app that has allowed people that have never scored before, with about 5 to 15 minutes worth of training, start scoring a game immediately. It's like a video game. So we had to have that, because the original concept was to do pickup basketball. The concept was to have an app and then find a team that you're compatible with, get a referee to show up, book a gym, and then start playing within 30 minutes to an hour, and those games counting for something. And it's evolved from that to where we are now, where we're in negotiation with shoe companies and NBA teams. So I mean, we had no idea that we were going to go on that journey.
Let's talk stats, all right? Let's kind of talk about what this is all about. That's what Dan's here for. First, let me ask you guys a question. How many of you heard that ridiculous statement, defense wins championships? It's okay. It's all right. Get them up. Okay, you've all heard it. You all know that's total crud, right? It's just not, based on the data, just not simply not true, right? Especially when it comes to basketball. In the NBA, for over 4 decades, more teams with better offensive numbers have won more playoff games and more championships. Facts don't care about your feelings, all right? That's just the truth. That doesn't mean that the disparity is so huge that defensive teams don't have a seat at the table, right? The Detroit Pistons, 03, 04, one of the best defensive teams we've seen in decades, right? They won championship. I think they won 2, matter of fact. So it doesn't happen like that all the time. But teams with better offensive numbers win more often than those that have better defensive numbers. Just facts, all right? Tell this Dan Dickey, who is, by the way...
You want me to go ahead and say exactly what you were saying?
Yes.
I might not do that.
So he's going to explain why that is, or some of the things he does. First of all, this guy's a numbers ninja.
But no, what you're saying, it's definitely true, generally speaking, but the reason why it looks like offenses have more control over who wins championships is because the offenses tend to have the great offenses have a larger disparity from the league norm than the great defenses have from league norm. So that they have it's easier to have a bigger disparity between offense and defense if your offense is the league best. And so generally, the team that has the largest disparity between the two has the best chance of winning championships. And so then it tends to look like offensive teams. That being said, obviously defense is half the game. It's just hard to be as elite a defensive team as you could be elite an offensive team.
Right.
It's almost impossible to build. It's almost impossible to scheme because the superstar player, the elite superstar players will take your offense to another level. James Harden and Houston. Much more than an elite defensive player can help a defense get to an elite level. And so, yeah, it's what you're saying is true, but it's
just true.
It's because it's just how it played out. But we don't ignore defense. That's for sure.
So one of the things we talked about here is education, right? And Hawaii Analytics helps. So look, the Oakland Athletics and small market teams that build rosters throughout the sports landscape using analytics. This is why we believe that players that are not blue chippers or on the outside of the bubble, right? We believe that data tells a story about everybody, right? Everybody has something to offer if you're looking for the right thing, right? So that's kind of why we believe in educating folks in the importance of statistical analysis and, kind of how that helps you get more eyeballs on you, so to speak. So if I was a player, Dan, and I was trying to figure out what are the main statistical categories that I need to focus on or improve upon. What are the main categories of statistical data that have the biggest impact on a player's overall, what's the word I'm looking for? The opinion of a player.
How projectable they are to future levels.
Right.
Well, right now, the way the game is, obviously it's proficiency at three-point range, and that includes proficiency and efficiency. Someone that the guy that takes a ton of threes and still hits 40%, that's obviously a high value and it's projectionable across leagues. If you want to delve a little, if you're trying to make say an 18-year-old who's putting up a certain stat profile right now, that's incredibly important. Getting to the foul line is incredibly important offensively still. And that gets a little forgotten about in the three-point revolution. Yes, taking a lot of threes is important, but if you're not drawing fouls and getting to the line, you're actually cutting away from another part that tends to be a very good, a very important way an efficient way to score offensively. And the bad teams will take a lot of threes and not get to the line. The good teams are able to do both. So getting the line, defensively, obviously high steal rate's really important. That tends to project across levels real well, and that just tends to tie to athleticism, anticipation. Block rates are nice. But I'm trying to think, I feel like there's assist rate's pretty important right now too.
So assists,
that's
field goal. We're just talking about offense versus defense thing now. I swear I heard all
that's what you're asking.
offensive categories because essentially, right, just like baseball.
Steal rate is not.
Sure. But what does the steal rate do? It leads to extra possessions, right? Offensively, right?
Well, okay, you're talking about winning games. I'm talking about projecting a player.
Sure. I just, just like in baseball, right? On base percentage, sort of. So extra possessions in basketball is paramount. Right? Okay. How does predictive modeling work? How do we figure out a way to take data? It's never going to be exact, but the more data that you have, we feel like we can kind of put it in a area about that big. And we can say we're pretty confident that what we've projected is going to fit in this hole, right? So how does it work?
The way I do it?
Yeah. Without giving away
there's not a lot of people doing it right now publicly. There's actually there's not a lot of people at teams doing it, which is shocking. I've been doing analytics my whole life. When I was a little kid, I was 10 years old, I was creating baseball, runs created formulas and all that type of stuff. When Bill James just started writing baseball abstracts. I went to basketball because baseball before I even got old enough to really get into it, it felt like everybody was already kind of doing that stuff. And I loved basketball and I played basketball all the time. And basketball did not have, you just had, you had your magazines, you saw points per game, rebounds per game, you just had all your basic stats, and you didn't have any kind of advanced analytics whatsoever. And so that's when I started delving into that 20 some odd years ago. But the way I do it is I take the history of everything I can get. So I have the entire history of the NBA, a good 20 years of college, Division I college basketball. You have G League, you have other leagues also. And then you start being able to take that data, you run it through the algorithms that you're creating and figure out which ones are the most predictive for figuring out which players are going to become better later and which ones are not. And you just keep doing it. And year by year you get better at it. Year by year you have more data to work with historically, so that the predictive aspect of it gets better. And before you know it, you start having modeling that appears, it does better than, say, top 8 teams draft. Where if you compare how I modeled the past 20 years in NBA draft, it outperforms by a pretty good margin the actual draft position of the players. And which years ago I was told was impossible. And for years I've been told it's impossible to model college data. It doesn't matter because it's all, it doesn't translate. Well, no, everything translates. If you work hard enough, figure out, and you find those connections, and you just keep working at it, you start really, the predictive power gets a lot better. And we're not talking about, it's not like I'm hitting 95% on who's going to be a really good player and who's not. But say the NBA is 55%, I'm hitting 65%, 100%. That's a huge, it's like if you're gambling, and you're 50%, if you can get 62%, you're going to be a billionaire practically.
If I get 70% odds on most anything, pretty good with that.
So there's hits and misses always.
Absolutely.
And there are guys that you're like, this guy's, Michael Beasley was an obvious one. Almost everybody that modeled had him as one of the greatest players of all time coming out of college. And all of us did. And I say all of us, the few I've seen, and then myself, and he's, I think, 4th or 5th in my last 20 years of highest model player. He never became a very good NBA player. He appeared to regress as a player through the years. But that was, outside of that, he's the most obvious negative outlier. And there are others.
Sure.
But even I remember Al Wakandi years ago when he was drafted. Yeah, he was, I think he's 20th on my model. And he went number 1, and everybody, next Shaq. No, he was a big guy, put up a lot of stats in a small school, and that's all it was.
He was out of the league in 5 years?
Yeah, and then you look back and go, man, how would they make such an obvious mistake looking at it? Back then, you get clouded by what everyone else is saying. Andrew Wiggins was the guy who was supposed to be next to LeBron. Oh, my model didn't like him all that much. He was right at the edge of lottery. And he's put up some, points per game totals in the NBA, but hasn't really. The model saw him as a stagnant, empty stat player, and he just has been for some. He's continued that. But that's kind of how I work. And the good thing about how I do my work is everybody else. The other thing is a lot of my analytics brethren and a few women, and a number of them have moved on to more advanced analytics, which is the brain. It just left my brain. What's the one NBA synergy? Yeah. So now we're doing possession-based analytics, which it's awesome. I think you can learn a lot of things when it comes to game planning and things like that. But because that data has not existed a long time, and it pretty much only exists in the NBA, it doesn't allow you to project players from multiple leagues, from leagues overseas to the NBA, or from college to the NBA. Luckily, since I've been dealing with generally box score stats my whole life, and it allows us a lot of opportunity to project almost anybody if we can just get those box score stats generally from whatever league we're dealing with.
Again, part of the education aspect of what we're doing too is good data is paramount. I mean, that's literally, we can't do, Dan can't do anything without good data. So how do you get good data?
As good a data as we can get.
That's what I mean.
Kind of good data, as long as it seems to correlate okay, but yeah, you're right.
Put it like this.
The better the data, the easier it is to have proper.
Within his modeling, we have what's called the confidence percentage, right? We don't get into the nuts and bolts of that, but I'm just saying, without good data, it's hard for him to get to 70% in terms of how he projects, how his models project. So getting good data is absolutely paramount. So that's part of this as well, is getting folks interested in being around the game, watching, score. I used to stat keep from home, right? Remember when you had a type? This is my mother, by the way. My mother had a typewriter. When I was a little kid, I used to write sports columns on this typewriter about a fictitious baseball team that I played on. So I would create these stories, and I tell you, I was a great hitter in my fixed Star Telegram. I was hitting, it's like me and Ted. No, yeah, I did. But it was a typewriter, Dan. It was the coolest thing. It was the coolest little typewriter. So it was me and Ted Williams had the highest batting averages of all time. It was amazing stuff. But I guess to get folks involved in the game, right? Whether you're watching as a fan, whether you're watching as a scout, whether you're watching and you want to build your own statistical data models, however you want to do it, that's part of this as well, right? Ryan, good data. Let's talk about good data for a second.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about good data, because I've been with this is my second stint with this company. In my first stint, thank you. It was complete, it wasn't different, but it was different, right? The vision was different. But that's part of the evolution of this stuff. And sports, is with sports and with what we're working with, you gotta adapt or you die, right? So that's kind of what we've done.
Yep.
So talk to me about sort of transitioning, using what you did originally, got the EPLAY scorekeeper app, collecting data, good data. How do we get good data in our world?
Well, that's not easy. If it were, they probably would have done it. Max Preps would have figured it out a long time ago. So it's definitely not an easy thing to do.
They got a lot of money. Somebody gave them a lot of money.
Somebody did give them a lot of money. Seems like a mistake.
For user-generated content, by the way.
Yeah. So the
You're jealous of them.
little bit.
We'll get there, guys. We'll get there. But the answer to your question is, we believe that data comes in skewed in two ways. It's either done intentionally or unintentionally. So you have to address those two root causes as to why that's happening. And again, when we're talking about data, of course we are talking about really, really high level data, but usually we always say, if you look at the spectrum of all the games that happen, the top 1% of games, NBA games, Division I games, some Division II games, Euro League games. Those games are kept, the score kept to the nth degree. They're score kept impeccably. And about 99% of the analytical models are built on top of those. Conversely, the bottom 99% of games that are happening, there's not even a box score for them. We don't even know what happened. And so if you're a college scout or recruiter trying to pull off of that, if you're Dan building products for those scouts and recruiters, and for Nike and for shoe companies that need to know, any agencies, anybody that needs to know who the future star of tomorrow is going to be, which is just about everybody, you got nothing to go off of. So you got to go back to the grassroots level. You got to go back to the high school level. And it comes back to one of those two things. It comes back to either the data was unintentionally or intentionally skewed when it came in. And so the way you address that is by essentially by taking control, by taking ownership, by taking accountability, and by holding the people that are in your data supply chain accountable. So for us, we have an online training program that we require any statistician that's going to input data into our system to go through. It walks them through exactly how the platform works. We test them on basic basketball proficiency. What is an assist? That needs to be uniformly defined. It's not even defined the same in the United States as it is in Europe.
Hockey assists in Europe, don't they?
I haven't seen it in the box. Yeah, I actually think Europe is. I actually think Europe is more stringent. With the way they do Oasis, but
except the rebounding above the rim. I wish we'd do that here, but
my point is, you have to create uniformity across everybody that's bringing the data in. So you put them through this class, which again hits on our program specifically and hits on basketball as a whole. They pass a certain level of proficiency there. Then they actually physically have to go do a ride-along with one of our already certified statisticians. And the only way you can automatically become a certified statistician without doing a ride-along is you are literally a college information officer. That's the only way. So when we go into a new market, our seed statisticians are always official collegiate level statisticians, and that's the way you start to raise the bar of the unintentional mistakes, right? So of course.
I think it's important, if the question is the collection of data, that we stumbled on a huge need in the marketplace, and that is these events. The statistician's table was a necessary evil. It was a pain to them. So for us to come in, if we did our job well, we were a welcome addition to the team because we could take over that scores table and take that headache off their plate. It's not easy finding good quality people. It's not easy, how much do you pay them? So they looked at it as a loss leader. They didn't see it like, team admissions or concessions or t-shirt sales or fill in the blank, whatever. It was, we gotta have a score or, won't know who wins. And so there was a tremendous amount of power just sitting there. And so we weren't able to just waltz in and take that away when we realized they had a need. So I think if you're an entrepreneur and you want to be in sports, you're looking for those niches that not everybody is seeing and they're overlooking. And it just so happens this is a huge engine for us. I mean, that's where the gold is buried. And so we found a need. It hadn't been easy. We're still working on it. But you get that data when you build an army of, we call them Uber drivers at times, where you put people to work and they can go to their app and score a game and be around the game they love and make a little money. So that's been huge for us from a business standpoint.
Angel, you had a question. Did you?
I did.
Okay.
So, and y'all are touching on it right now. One of the things that drew me out here were two things. My kids program, that's what you know. So let me ask a question about that. So from a kid's aspect, taking the data that you have, are you guys marketing to parents and Little League coaches about?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, great. And then the second half of the question is, how do you make money off of it?
So when we opened, we talked about good data coming in, guys like this analyze it, and then we put it in products and send it out. So, and I mentioned products for a number of stakeholders, right? So Jamie hit on those stakeholders in the opening. It's players, it's parents, it's coaches, it's scouts, it's recruiters, it's media members, it's fans, it's anybody involved in any level of sports, or in this case, basketball. So the product offering is slightly different for each one. So, obviously a recruiter needs something slightly different than a parent might need. So at the player and parent level, we sell something called the EPLAY player report card. Essentially what it is, it shows you where you rank in our eScore algorithm, and then we break that down for you so you can actually see where you're stacking up against your competition from that event.
Regionally, like you got all the players in Dallas.
We're heading that direction.
Right now it's event to event.
Right now
Some events are much, some events have higher,
So right now it's event to event because some events are smaller events that don't have quite the quality of competition in them, and other events are major events. I mean, with the NBPA 100 we did, and Pangos, and Pangos isn't quite as high as that one, but they're almost comparable somewhat. But they are still apples and oranges. But the good thing is you're getting a really good idea of say, if you had data on your kid, you're getting a good idea of where they're stacking up within the competition they're performing against in that event. And then what we're trying to do is get enough of these events that we can connect them. When you have enough players playing this event here and enough players playing this event here, you can start spider webbing and connecting them. It's like what we have to do with EYBL, because they have Peach Jam, they have EYBL, and they have the other tournament. I forget, it's Peach something. Well, the two of those, the Peach Jam and the other Peach, have pretty much all the same players from EYBL, but they're different from each other. But we can spider web them because we've connected them. We've done ratings on all of them within their little ecosystems of data. And so so eventually we want to connect as many as possible, so that
a lot of the tournaments are regional, right?
right. Oh yeah, we're scorekeeping a lot of them. Yeah. Oh yeah. So we're it's hard. It's tricky, and the data collection is still tricky. It takes a while to get to where the scorekeepers are really consistent. And you'll get, and several scorekeeper won't show up. You're having to do a substitute scorekeeper isn't quite as ready, and you get the data. You go, the scorekeeper has missed a few rebounds, missed a few assists. It's pretty obvious. And you start figuring out what you can do about it, or maybe you can get back into the game log, and it takes a while, So.
So are y'all developing something that's going to eventually replace those books that you were talking about, where they're actually going to be able to do this?
We're doing that now. We've got that now.
Okay.
Yeah, the book just sits there, and the only time the book ever gets used is if there's some horrible power outage or something.
Yeah, the book is still. We still think that the book is a nice thing to keep around for whatever reason, right?
For emergency.
For emergency. In a lot of ways, it's cool that we use our app, to do all that stuff. But if somebody's next to them doing it as a whatever, if they want to make sure, no problem with that. But yes, that's what we're doing now. Absolutely. Right above us here, this is the player report card that we were just talking about. Scroll down here. Charles left me.
It looks like it was a real player at one of the tournaments. I'm sure it was. Oh yeah, Bill Raheem's kid.
So this is one of the things that we market to the youth, mainly to mom and dad, right? All right, mom and dad pay for most everything. Like we were in Houston this last week, and I wasn't talking to the kids. I'll talk to mom and dad. Here's you pay for everything, right, mom and dad? Okay, that's how you need to talk to us. So what these do though, video game fans, NBA 2K, right? One of the cool things that you started to see, way back in the Genesis days, like the 90s, you could create your own team, you could create your own player, you could create yourself. That was always kind of cool. Well, these kids in the NBA 2K generation, but they are themselves within our global ecosystem of basketball stats. So if you're a kid, right, and you're thinking, man, I'm pretty good at this game, I play a lot, I think I do okay, and I'm in this EPLAY system and everything else. We believe that
you essentially create this competitive, we call it the competition algorithm, right? Well, that's what these kids are too. They're the competition algorithm, right? That's the mindset, sort of, right? How do I become, first of all, certified, right? Marketing. EPLAY Gold. Oops. Max. Reverse. It's weird. Lefties. I know. So EPLAY Gold. Kind of tell us about EPLAY Gold real quick, just so what this is. This is another product, but it's sort of a part of our report cards, etc.
So we want to provide basic live stats and box scores. That was monumental just to get us in the marketplace. And so we made the decision to give that away, and then it's the premium services. And so we have our gold product, and we have gold products for all of our different market segments. The players are the most. That makes up that 40 million that he was mentioning earlier. So whether it's coach, whether it's recruiter, whether it's media, we're even getting that now. But it's the parent. What other industry, anything that you're involved in that you put that much time and effort and money in and get no feedback, no neutral report card, it's just insane. So EPLAY Gold, 2 versions of it, the ability to just purchase a report card, use about $9.99, just purchase it for the weekend or whatever. And then after that we'll launch more of a monthly service to where those that are heavy users can get a lot more services on a monthly basis. But basically we're taking that original box score. Dan and his team are going in and crunching those numbers and giving them the breakdown. How did you perform against the rest of this tournament? How did you perform against the rest of the country? How do you perform against the rest of the world? Is where we're going with this. And it gives them the ability, A, to be seen in a new and different way, especially with the changing of the rules. It's making it harder and harder to be seen, as crazy as that is. Some of the new rules that we have as far as the ability to go recruit these kids. And if you'll scroll down just a little bit, you're starting to see that's how the percentiles break down. But we create what you were alluding to in 2K, and that's an overall score, our E-score. And we feel like that's going to revolutionize sports, quite honestly. We see a day to where you will refer to that will be part of the vernacular of statistics and analytics, bringing the naked eye together with analytics to get an overall score. And guys like Dan, and quite frankly, a community that we're hoping to build to be a part of this, to help make it even better. We use that for these kids, and now they'll know what was their overall E-score for that event, what's their overall E-score from their scholastic experience, what's their overall E-score. What you're seeing there is one of the things we're getting one of the biggest responses from, and that's the comparative analysis, the ability to quickly go in there and say, I want to see how I stack up against the MVP of the tournament. What you're seeing there is that blueprint. We call it kind of the fingerprint. Now we're getting a little deep in the analytics, and I'm not the guy that should be talking about that, but I can understand shapes. I do colors and shapes. So it's a color and a shape. Basically that radar that you're looking at indicates if you were a complete circle there, you'd be the best at every category. Okay, so you're seeing different, so we put the raw stats in, we do the analysis, and we're able to get a visual footprint, and you lay those on top of each other, and you can say, how did I stack up against the best? So in theory, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, fill in the blank would be as circular as you can get. Then you start seeing areas where you can improve, and it helps a lot because typically you look at the highest score of the game and say it's the best guy on the, and that's not necessarily the case. Is that right? He may not be the best overall basketball player. Right? And depending on what you're looking for.
Yeah, the tournament. Yeah.
Absolutely.
He played the best of it.
I mean, when we're talking about tournaments, this is a small sample size. So the guy that's all everybody says, oh, this is number 2 rated player in the nation, and you have him 5th in that tournament. Oh yeah, in those 4 games he played, he didn't quite play as well as 4 other guys theoretically, And if their scores are real close, then we're talking that's within standard deviation anyway, maybe it's 2nd or 3rd, however you want to look at it. But if we just want to get a good idea, we want people to have a good idea what their kid, whether that kid's their player or their son or daughter. We also been scorekeeping female games, which is good. We want them to just have an idea of how their kid is performing with their competition. And then the exciting thing is, more of these leagues and tournaments that we get combined together. Right now it's EYBL, the bigger ones. We can connect those to the colleges, project them to the colleges, project them to the NBA, and at some point, hopefully in the next year or so, I'll be able to say, this kid here is ranked, 24th in the nation amongst all players, NBA players in terms of their potential in the future. So we can say Kate Cunningham is a guy that I just rated.
It's a name of
he's projecting to be the third best player in 2027 or something. It's now obviously we're projecting that far in the future. There's a lot of noise. We understand that, but it really kind of gives you a perspective of, and plus we can also explain why that player is projecting as well as they do, what they're great at, what's causing them to stand out as much as they are. And we're trying to find. I remember when I was doing the college stuff years ago, when Seth Curry and Davison was kind of breaking my model, and I was like, this kid is the highest rated kid I've ever seen. Or take it back, highest rated guard I've ever seen. I think Tim Duncan was the highest rated I ever had coming out of college, and I'm like, he's gonna be a superstar. And so when that draft came up, I was like, and everyone was arguing, he's just like, dude, when a guy stands out that much, they stand out that much, And it's easy. And the thing is, the other thing is, I want to, if any of you guys are scouts or coaches, I was hoping to get a few here. We have some that we work with.
We will, though. It's our first time.
They couldn't come tonight, so our scouts and scouting aspect of the company isn't even here. I'm not anti-scout. I'm not anti-coach at all. I think both need to work hand in hand, and because what happens when you're doing analytics on thousands of players, you start having groupings. You have tiers where you have a number of guys that are kind of all sitting in that same area, have different skill sets, and you can kind of say, well, I would think this guy, but hey, you put them in a gym and have coaches and scouts look at them, they might look at it different, but that's okay. They're still looking at players that you still see as similar in quality, right? But the good thing about the analytics is we're allowing them to see everybody. Because the scout that Alan always talks about that we work with, he can only go one game at a time. And he only sees one player at a time. And the top 10 player he's heard about, and he's going to see that player and whoever he's playing with. And so he's missing out on 95% of that kid's games and missing out on 99% of other kids' games. And it's hard to, at least with the data, if we get the data, we can analyze 100% of those minutes, and so that's what we're trying to do, and making it easier for teams and coaches to make decisions, and not miss some guys. Some guys that John Morant wasn't really, colleges weren't really after him. Now I wasn't projecting him because I didn't have the high school data. I'd be willing to bet his high school data was pretty strong. I'm just guessing. His freshman year was solid at Murray State. His sophomore year was incredible, but so. Yeah.
The best part to me about this and what Dan was talking about, and part of the education aspect in terms of parents and kids and coaches and everything else, is what we do, work with numbers and data, it removes all biases. All of it. We don't push individual players. We don't push teams. We let the data speak for itself, right? So how many of you have heard of the anti-analytics folks? Charles Barkley is probably at the forefront of that, right? If I told Charles Barkley that based on analytical data, he was the 12th best player in the NBA's history, do you think he would probably be like, okay, I'll listen, I'll hear what you have to say now, right? Isn't that what it is? Like based on
he's not that high in mind, but he's
top 15, top 20, something like that. Let's just say he was a top 20 based on the analytic. Again, that's part of the education of this, is understanding that there's no agenda. We take the data that we're given, we apply it. We don't push anybody. Yeah.
I had a question about the EAT score. So
Okay.
based on EAT score, did you weight certain factors by more important? So like 3-point rank as opposed to 2-point rank. Did you weight the 3-point rank more important and have more of a hold on the overall EAT score grade than 2-point rank?
No.
No?
It's okay. Well, I say no. It's not quite that simple. Data gets normalized with all these different tournaments. If a player is scored at a certain efficiency at a certain tournament, say a 60% true shot percentage, and it had the same exact pace as this other player, and this other player has 60% true shot percentage. But the tournament, there wasn't a lot of good 3-point shooters. But this one kid was very good at 3-pointers, and this other guy didn't shoot any. it is definitely feasible. This one guy that shot a bunch of three-pointers wound up getting a higher score in terms of his scoring proficiency relative to the rest of that league, because he had an outlier that was definitely better than the rest of the tournament did. So there's aspects like that. But generally speaking, no. It's complex sometimes. So it's kind of, and so it's not a specific hard no. And obviously pace and strength of schedule, things like that come into play. Whether or not we can incorporate strength of schedule, depending on how the scheduling is. At college, which obviously incorporated when we're talking about the entire college season.
I did want to, did that adequately answer your question?
Yeah.
I did want to make a point though on what you were speaking about a second ago with the Charles Barkley deal. We were, obviously we had the opportunity to get to pitch a number of NBA teams now, and when we sit down with them, the pitch we make to them is actually, in my opinion, it's very reflective of reality, which is it doesn't have to be all analytics or all naked eye. There's our naked eye guy right there walking in. Alan Branch, scout. But it doesn't have to be all of one or the other, right? It should be a combination of the two. As a matter of fact, when we're pitching them, we usually use this analogy. If you're sitting in your war room and you're sitting there at the head of the table as the GM, and you've got 4 or 5 guys around there, hopefully, or currently, each and every one of those guys is going to walk in with a different perspective, which is great. But the only commonality between every single one of those guys is it's coming through their eyes, it's going through their brain, and it's being perceived through their biases. There just needs to be one seat at that table that's unbiased. Give the numbers and the data one seat at that table. Allow your other 4 to 5 guys to voice their opinion, and then hear out what the data has to say. Why would you want to make a decision with less information? Why would you want to make a decision failing to represent the unbiased half of potential perspectives? It doesn't make any sense to me. And the fact that they always feel like the current narrative is it has to be all one or the other is just totally erroneous. We're here to be a tool and to provide a service that helps to complement everything else that they're doing.
Yeah, I actually want to say, I think in your intro you mentioned that basketball is taking the forefront in terms of analytics.
Well, more along the lines of...
I think they're trying to be innovative.
Right.
But what we've run into, I know a lot of analysts and teams, and it's tricky because teams don't want to pay analysts a lot of money, and they often don't want to listen to them. So they'll get hired, they'll work for these teams, and they'll just realize whatever they're creating, and some of these analysts are good and will create unique, innovative things, and some of them will just compile all the stuff you can get publicly and just, well, that's informative. It's still informative. And it doesn't mean they're bad. They're just, but, and it can be helpful, but a lot of these teams don't, their coaches or they just don't want to hear it. And I've come across that a bit. And I've come across that personally where I was like, I don't think I want to work for smaller money and no real upward trajectory unless they really think I look like a GM in the future, which I don't really look like one of those people. It'd be more exciting to work somewhere where I can be innovative and create at a larger scale. And then if they want to hire us and they want to be a client of ours, hey, that's awesome. And we'll give them the best information we can, and they can incorporate in whatever they're accumulating already in their scouts and their. And I think a lot of it also it helps with resources. You need to know where to send the scouts, and it's a little easier if you have a way to narrow that scope a little bit. These teams spend a lot of money on scouting and a lot of money on just player evaluation, with their eyeballs. And so,
I got a question for you, Dan. When you see a team like Houston, right? The Houston Rockets, they're kind of the analytics team in the NBA, right?
Yeah,
we can agree on that.
Never hire a real analytics GM. Right?
Sure, he's a big fan. Daryl Morey has been, public and adamant about why, numbers, this kind of stuff is how he likes to build basketball teams. So when you hear that they acquire Russell Westbrook, to come and play with James Harden, and everybody says, that'll never work. And you think to yourself, knowing, and doing what we do you go, no, I think they know kind of what they're doing here when, they only got one basketball to play with, Dan. These two ball-stopping guys. But when you say it, or when you hear somebody say, that won't work, especially when you're talking about Daryl Morey and the Rockets, your thoughts are, no, I think they probably did their homework here. What do you think that they saw when they were like, other than the fact that it was Russell Westbrook, what do you think they saw in terms of the numbers that says this will work here?
Well, I think one thing, they must have talked to Westbrook and Harden quite a bit about this, because there's no way they'll be able to continue the usage rates that they're both used to.
Sure.
When they're both on the same team. So obviously one or both are saying they're willing to scale that back somewhat, and I'm assuming it's going to be Westbrook, because obviously Harden is a much more efficient player when it comes to scoring. And obviously when it comes to player performance, this isn't something that's additive. We're like, we can take how Westbrook played at Oklahoma City and take how Harden played. We'll add them together. No, it's absolutely doesn't work at all that way, obviously. So I think they believe a scaled down Westbrook will become more efficient. Will still will be a very good passer. He's not a great defender, but he creates a little havoc on defense sometimes. He's a good rebounder, obviously, for a guard, which allows you to run, not worry about running your small lineup quite as much. And so, no, I'm sure they did quite a bit. And the other thing Morey does, and which I think makes some sense, it's the idea of get the best player we can get, and D'Antoni will make it work.
Sure.
And I think that's kind of what they're doing right there. Is they realize, Westbrook's the best player we can get right now to pair with Harden. Chris Paul wanted out, or Harden wanted Paul out, or whatever. So they're like, well, let's go and bring in Westbrook. Let's see if D'Antoni works in Magic, and who knows. I think there's a lot of that going on, because if they didn't bring Westbrook in and they got rid of Paul and for kind of nothing, the odds of them winning a championship are not very good.
Sure.
There's only so much Harden can do.
And also, even in a small sample size, their time at OKC together, if you go back and look at that, their plus minus with them on the floor was one of the highest in the league, believe it or not.
But that was
before James Harden figured out
he was
awesome.
He was the man.
Yeah.
He played a Serbian role because he was young.
It was before he was.
But we knew he was going to be really good. I mean, he projected really well.
Right.
So we knew he was going to get a star, and he kind of got given away for not as much as you would expect. But
She asked about how we which one of us should we answer the question?
Yeah.
Did we answer the monetizing question?
Basically, but if you guys, look, there's a tip jar somewhere around here. If you guys want to help out, for
I see something else that I'm sure.
Absolutely.
You guys already know.
Go ahead. You can talk to us about anything.
Legalized sports gambling.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been talked to about that.
It is. It's on our. We got it on our whiteboard, chalkboard thing or whatever, whiteboard over there somewhere.
This is a thing that's kind of set off to the side, and if we have kind of accomplished everything we need to accomplish here, we want to create a separate company that's dealing with that, and we have our analysts want to work in that type of field, yeah, we'll probably do it. But it's not something you want to mix right now when you're dealing with stuff like this.
Yeah, I agree. And just FYI, interesting fact, I was recently in a session with the GM of the Stars, and he was asked a question, what does he see legalized sports gambling was the next thing?
Yes.
Answer.
It's part of my brain too.
Yeah.
Big guy, but
The money is going to be discussed.
Yeah, that definitely is the next big thing. A lot of the professional sports leagues are really getting in on that and recognizing that. For us, obviously there are youth circles that we run in, and we have to be very careful about how we associate and align our brand.
so NCAA compliance and our
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's a fairly complex world of red tape that we're currently tiptoeing through and kind of stepping over. It's like one of those rooms with like a bunch of lasers going all over it, like in a safe or something. We're having to move around them all, but I mean, it's an obvious natural transition, and for a company like us, a data company like us, even if we don't do anything like that ourselves, Obviously, we're not talking about personal data, we're talking about sports data, but sports data, we can license it to people that do go and do some of their own stuff, which actually is not totally different than one of the big reasons why we're here. It's a big thing we want to do for people that do want to build models. We want to help supply them data and a place that they can workshop those models and build them out and find ways to monetize them. So that's certainly something that's coming.
I'll give you one other one that we weren't really expecting. With a name like EPLAY, we get some confusion. Oh, you video games, you guys are esports, that's a big deal. And obviously we're in grassroots basketball, we're in go out and play, but we've been approached recently by the esports. And so if we can create an e-score for a real basketball game, let your mind resonate on that a little bit. Take the same application to you guys who are, we've had several things where we take the real stats and we put them in the game. Then we've had, hey, can you apply your e-score and your analytics to my play in the game? So as you guys know, you got professional gamers, and we thought, so we have to stay very focused.
We had some approach.
I'm going to ask you, since I haven't been in any of those meetings, we haven't been approached by anybody wanting us to analyze gamer performance, right? Oh yeah, okay. That had to be more recent because I figured that'd be something to be real easy to do as long as they're keeping the data.
Well, it's also weird that you mentioned this or bring this up. Because esports is like the next big thing, you guys. I mean, it's huge, right? There's a guy named Ninja. Everybody heard of him? Ninja. Twitch, right? Twitch was the big video game streaming platform. Well, he just left Twitch because Microsoft gave him $10 million to exclusively play video. Listen to this. You play video. He just plays video games and films it. That's it. And he didn't even just win the $3 million Fortnite thing that the other day that kid won. Some 16-year-old won $3 million playing Fortnite. I told my daughter, I was like, you do nothing else, pick up a tablet and start playing Fortnite, that's it, this is it, we're gonna retire. No, but that's how expansive this whole world is, right? When you talk about data and analytics and numbers, and you mentioned fantasy sport. I guess if you wanted to, you could purchase stuff from us. It doesn't even right? Could you take it? Couldn't somebody? Like if I came to you and said, hey, I want to buy all your stuff, like your info, so that I can draft my
data?
Yeah.
Want to buy some data from us?
I want to buy your data.
Yeah.
I want to buy one of those
data
EA packages or something. So there you go. We do have products for everybody, right? So maybe all data and all the stuff you want to use, you can apply it towards drafting fantasy teams.
I'd be interested to ask the folks here, what excites you about analytics or statistics? Do you have any businesses right now? Again, we want to provide our data platform to people like yourselves or people that you know. So I would say please pass the word along. We're going to try to do some of these some more. We're going to start replicating it in other cities. But we want to begin by giving you a data set to play with, a sandbox. So I'd love to know if there are any business ideas out there. I know people that come to these kind of things a lot of times have their own gig going, and I like to find out what people are doing.
So I can say the word analytics is really what brought me here. Not so much sports. Honestly, it's really not just sports at all. What I do, I participate on this. It's an online play by email, and it happens to be focused around Star Trek. And so something I've done. Again, I spent some time, I've taken a Coursera course on data science, right? So, just intense data.
You're trying to absorb as much information
Right.
as you can.
And so we have a small play base that's 30 people. Data that you talked about, for years, 5 years, whatever you want to say, far from it. So, what I'm doing, I'm really looking at any medium that says analytics. Just to see, you mentioned giving a data set, things like that, I try to immerse yourself in it so that you become more proficient and are able to apply it to what you're doing. So I do a monthly player stats. I mean, I've got like 6 columns of data, really not much, but what we've seen is, you give this to somebody on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, and says, well, you're not If you're not playing to the extent that established when you first started, you need to keep up, pick up, and make up. At the same time, at work, I work for an airline where I work on the ramp, and I oversee the employees that use the scanners that scan your bags on planes, all the bags, things like that. So we're tracking data like that as well. For the 50 bags that are on the flight, you scan every single bag. Not just scanning on and off. Customers want to know where their bag is at every step of the trip. So it's not just on and off the plane. They would scan it when you checked in. They would scan when they went through the bag system. The data is also used for location. We want to make sure that we provide that information to the customers. So, I think it's definitely beneficial to set the groundwork to at least explain to people what it is that you're doing. And you can see who's actually interested. You see if they're about how that can come out to something else. And if things are becoming available, like data sets, things like that, where I can jump in and play it, things like that, I think that we would grab, and then I'm saying, hey, that's something to the next thing we're doing.
We're really great. We just happen to have right somebody interact with Fred with the game, and so you find out that they're maybe more into basketball and stuff as well. Meeting girls.
Right. And even removing sports and just calling it analytics, it's completely fine. It's just numbers, right? It's just math. That's all we're doing. We just apply it to sports, right? We don't apply it to anything but sports right now. But it's okay. You don't have to be a sports fan or anything to kind of be intrigued by what we have to offer, right?
And I also think with the analytics part, who knows if I'm immersed in all this data, that might be the determining factor. Hey, I do like sports data, I like the game.
We're looking at it that way.
Right. I will tell you, it'll change the way you look at sports. It'll change the way you watch it. I know now, I watch games from a mindset that is math and science and data.
I've always been watched it that way. I think that's something
Again, talking about bias and all that other kind of stuff with numbers, the best players are going to have the best numbers. That's just the way. That doesn't really change, right?
Yeah, normally.
Right. So Michael Jordan's still going to be considered one of the greatest of all time based on our statistical and data analysis and everything else.
Along those lines, I think it's important kind of for the average non-analytic person to understand the value. I was telling you, one of my passions is to try to get us from here to there. And so one of the things I think is so cool about this particular data visualization, we were talking about patterns that are created. So what these guys help me to understand is that's how statistical predictive analysis can happen is you get enough data. It's a lot like the insurance companies. After a while, they kind of know different demographics, different situations. They can then start, don't go politics on me, okay. The point is this, you get enough data and you get a visual footprint that says,
I'm gonna crash my car.
the odds tell us. So let me see how it blew my mind. So I said, let me see if I understand. A guy like James Harden, a guy like Steph Curry has a footprint, a shape. And his is probably not completely circular. He may be lower on the defensive end or whatever the case may be. And so how that applies down the food chain, if you will, is you're a mid-level team, you're a coach in high school or whatever. I want a kid, everybody would love to have, a James Harden, but there's only one James Harden. But by this, we can create a visual footprint he would be smaller. Literally, the shape of everything would be the same, but it'd be smaller. Whereas James Harden's would be bigger because he's better at all of those different metrics. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correctly for the most part? So you get to where you get these visual shapes, if you will, of what does a defensive stopper look like, a 3-and-D kind of guy. What does all offense and no defense? And these guys can look at. I attributed a little bit to the scene in The Matrix where he suddenly realizes everything's made out of numbers, and that's the way Dan views the world.
Yes, it is.
When I walk in, he sees me as all these digits, and I'm like, so that's.
You ever go to a building with a lot of floors on it? It will remember the parking spot, it will remember the floor as long as it's a number. That's all it says. Yeah.
Yeah, so, I actually, oh man, he stepped away. There's a gentleman.
Yeah, were you want to say something?
No, kind of have coming.
Microphone?
No, I need one. I don't need a microphone, do it?
Oh, it helps because there is an online
Oh, okay.
we're streaming it here.
We're streaming, so
Yeah.
some other people listen. You know, when I got involved and partnered with these guys, 20-some years of naked eye scouting, the one thing you gotta take out of this is tool. Analytics really has nothing to do with basketball